Hey bud, that's right, I read an absolutely insane amount of books this year. This is how I did it and why the heck I would do something like that. It's absolutely crazy to me. I loved reading when I was younger. When I was in college, I didn't really read all that much because there just wasn't time. I didn't read for pleasure. I had to read tons and tons of textbooks. And so since graduating, I've been trying to get myself back into it. And so for over the past couple of years, I read just an astonishing amount of books. Yes, that title is right. And I'm going to talk about some of those books, especially the history books, because that's what you're here for. So how the heck am I doing this? Because if I was actually buying all those books and then trying to read them all just in normal time, there's not enough time in the day. That's a book every other day, essentially. And that's an awful lot of money. Here's how. First off, audiobooks. Audiobooks are your friend. I would say more than 2/3 of these books were listened to rather than physically read. I do think that there's a slight difference between reading a physical book and an audiobook. I think especially if you're trying to work on reading comprehension or something like that, a physical book is going to be your friend. But if you're just trying to get the information into your head, an audiobook is a great way to do that. Especially when you're talking about an audiobook, you can increase the speed on them. So if it's a book that is kind of boring or maybe is very dry but you still want to read, you just crank that speed up. I first started doing this when I had to watch videos for a lot of my classwork in college. I would just increase the speed. I've gotten to 2x speed with a lot of things. Obviously, if it's something that may be a little bit more complicated, I'll drop that speed down a little bit. But if they talk really slow, I speed that crap up. Obviously, I am reading normal physical books, but probably one a week versus 3 or 4 books that I'm covering in a week time. The amazing thing about audiobooks versus a physical book is you can actually do other things while you're reading the book. With an audiobook, you can be doing the dishes, doing the laundry, whatever chores you're doing, you can be listening to an audiobook. While I'm driving to work, while I'm driving by myself, I just crank on an audiobook, get to enjoy learning about whatever it is that I want to learn about. On top of that, don't play a ton of video games. This is basically blasphemy to someone who's like an actual gamer. Instead of listening to a lot of shooting noise or explosions or whatever, just listen to an audiobook about World War II as I'm playing Battlefield 5. Talk about how I'm doing this, as well as how to avoid paying for a bunch of stuff. So the first one is Audible. Audible is great. Same with Amazon. You can also go to physical bookstores, whether it's a Barnes & Noble or that local one that the guy with the beret owns. Another great option is thrift stores. Don't necessarily find brand new books or books that you super want to read in this moment, but if you have a list of books that you want to read and you're just browsing through the thrift store, I have found dozens of books that I've wanted to read for $1 or 50 cents sometimes at a thrift store. Well, online, there's a lot of free classics. There's a lot of audiobooks on YouTube. Anything that's its copyright point and is now in public domain, you can find a lot of those just on YouTube or on Google Books. Books that I've read that was written by Teddy Roosevelt or autobiographies by people who are long dead like Booker T. Washington, I found those for free online. Then obviously there's the library. The library is an amazing resource. They got like 1 million books in there. You can go find basically any book you want, and most libraries you can request certain books. So maybe you don't want to buy a certain book, but you can ask them to buy it, and a lot of times they'll do it in a reasonable amount of time. This was especially true in my college library, but by far and away, the best resource if you like books, whether it's audiobooks or ebooks, is Libby. Libby is an amazing app. You connect your library card, whether it's a school library or a local library, you can connect it to the Libby app, and then you gain access to thousands upon thousands of options, endless amounts of books on there. There's ebooks and there's audiobooks, and so either way, you're getting them for free. You can check them out or you can place a hold on it just like a normal library. So let's say you want to read, but you don't really know what to read. You'd like to start, but like that seems hard. First, just choose whatever random book you want to read. You want to read Harry Potter again? Read it. And then as you work your way up to feeling more comfortable reading and making a good hobby, then you can pick harder books that maybe aren't quite as easy, but you still really want to read. Another thing is, if it's a stupid book and you don't like the book, stop reading the book. You don't get an award for finishing books. Last step to making sure you actually read the book is just do it. You just got to do it. Shia LaBeouf style. Obviously, I absolutely love history and I love history books. Otherwise, I wouldn't start a history YouTube channel. I read an endless amount of different types of books, though. I didn't just focus on history. Sometimes I wanted something a little bit lighter. And then I also read a lot of historical fiction, like All Quiet on the Western Front. This copy from 1958 I got for free. It used to be in my high school library. I read this book a whole bunch of times. And because they just came out with that new movie on Netflix, I had to reread it. Let me tell you, this is amazing. So is that movie. Go watch it. You don't win Oscars for nothing. Now, really onto the history books. Now, there's a lot of different types of what I would classify within the history genre. There's sort of history-adjacent books that aren't strictly history, but are using features from history to make a point. Subscribe for more. I'm putting out videos all the time. More modern history, whether it be Black Hawk Down or something more recent. Then there's history books. What you think of history, whether it's a pop history type book or whether it's a harder, more dense type history book, falls into this category. To start off with, not specifically history, but essentially history adjacent, is Rational Optimist by Matt Ridley. This book is super fun. It takes things from history and it puts them through the lens of an optimistic look on how the future might turn out. Because a lot of times, especially when you're talking about futurism, it's always dystopian, it's always negative and pessimistic. This is more, life is great, things keep getting better. Another great one is In Order to Live by Yomi Park. This book is incredible. I listened to this via audiobook and I've read this physical book several times, to the point where I got it signed by her in person. The story of her escaping from the horrors that is North Korea, but then moving on into China and being sold as a slave in China. Actually goes through her whole life from when she's a kid eating grasshoppers just to survive in North Korea to getting to China and having a quote-unquote better life being a slave. I considered modern history anything really since the towers fell. So since 9/11, this has been our history, my history, your history. This time together, we might not think about as much, but this is our time. The war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, 9/11, they'll be thinking about these times. And so I really wanted to learn about those because I was a child through most of them. A lot of my friends did go off and fight in the war once we graduated from high school, but these are things that while I knew basic understanding of, I didn't know the nitty-gritty of the Battle of Fallujah or Baghdad. There's a lot of really great books that came out of this. A lot of Navy SEAL books as well, since those guys have really blown up the past couple of years. Author Jocko Willink. I've talked about him before in my videos about podcasts. You should check out his podcast and that video about it. I've written a bunch of different books from Extreme Ownership and Dichotomy of Leadership and Leadership Strategy and Tactics, where basically he takes his experience as a lieutenant commander in the Navy SEALs and his time on the ground in the streets of Baghdad, and talking about that mixed in with life strategies and business strategies and how to have a successful life. Books that really fit into this is like 12 Strong by Doug Stanton. It's about the special forces teams and CIA agents who snuck into Afghanistan right after the towers fell, made Al-Qaeda pay for what they did. Super interesting. I had heard about a lot of these things before. Obviously, they made a major motion picture about it, but the book itself is actually really good. Other books that were made into movies that are also super good: Lone Survivor by Marcus Luttrell, American Sniper by Chris Kyle, Operator by Robert O'Neill, his experience killing bin Laden. All of these are personal experiences of soldiers on the ground, real history books that you're really here for. David McCullough starting off the list, an amazing author. You've probably read one of his books if you've read any history books. I really went down the rabbit hole of David McCullough books and I read 12 more. Also has some sleepers, like the Johnstown Flood. This is an amazing book. I had vaguely heard of the actual event, but didn't really know very much about it. Well, I read his book, and oh my gosh, this book is incredible. This story is horrifying. Basically, a gigantic dam explodes, all the water goes surging through, tens of thousands of people are misplaced or die, their homes are taken away, everything catches on fire because it's coal country, so there's coal everywhere. The flood is just fire flood. People are jumping from house to house, all the fire, there's fire everywhere. It's absolutely terrifying. I should probably make a video about this. It's an amazing story. I don't know how it's not a TV show or a movie yet. It would put Last of Us to shame. Help a history bro out and subscribe for more content. If you're looking for some history that's a lot more fun and lighthearted, any book by Sarah Vowell I think is a great one. She's a writer for a lot of comedy shows. Two of the books that I read by her this year, Lafayette in the Somewhat United States, which is about the Marquis de Lafayette when he came back to the United States in his older years and went and traveled around and partly Cloudy Patriots. I recommend her books as audiobooks because it has a full ensemble cast of all the different people talking, switches to really famous actors. Author I know you know I was going to talk about was Stephen E. Ambrose. Obviously he's most famous for Band of Brothers, but he wrote a lot of other great books. If you do want more World War II content, he has D-Day and Citizen Soldiers, both great books. My favorite book, and a surprising upset, was actually Undaunted Courage, about the Lewis and Clark expedition. It covered so many different things, many places that I've visited previously in the past. And it makes me want to go there again and record it for you, so subscribe because I'll probably do travel content at some point and you don't want to miss that. Another great author is Tim Ballard. Now, I've read a bunch of his books. I recommend all of them, but this one in particular, Slave Stealers, is great. It was good enough that I read in ebook form and then had to get this book and get him to sign it. So Timothy Ballard was a CIA agent and operator for Homeland Security, specializing in trying to free people from trafficking. So it goes through his story of when he decided to leave his government job and go and try and find an American who got kidnapped in Haiti. And it goes through his story of setting up an organization called Operation Underground Railroad. As well, it talks about Harriet Jacobs, who was a slave in the pre-Emancipation Proclamation South, escaped from slavery, but her children were still held as slaves. And so she hid herself for years until she was able to figure out a way to get them to safety. Like the Vietnam War, well, 6 Years in the Hanoi Hilton by Amy Shivy Hawk is a great book. It talks about her father's experience as a POW held and tortured by the communist North Vietnamese. Another great book, River of Doubt by Candace Millard. I've talked about Teddy Roosevelt in a couple different videos so far, as well as his journey through the Amazon to discover a new river. I definitely recommend reading it. I also recommend you checking out those videos after you watch this one. Great book is The Gulag Archipelago by Solzhenitsyn. Say that 3 times fast. It largely is his story of him as a prisoner sent to a gulag as a soldier during World War II. It really goes over a lot of the atrocities committed by the Soviets on their own innocent people, including the fact that if you were held as a POW by the Germans during World War II, as soon as you got released and went back to the Soviet Union, they sent almost all those guys to gulags and they almost all died there. Imagine being freed from the Nazi POW camp and then going to a worse camp by your own people. Another incredibly sad book about atrocities during World War II is The Rape of Nanking by Iris Chang. This book is an in-depth look at the atrocities committed by the Japanese Imperial Army in China during World War II, specifically in Nanking, now Nanjing, China. This book is incredibly graphic and intense, not for young audiences, adults only. It's even sadder when you consider the fact that after writing this book, Iris Chang took her own life. Another great book is The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Scherer. He was a war correspondent for the United States Army during World War II, and following the war, he got access to a lot of documents following the fall of the Third Reich. He goes through in depth with interviews from people from the life of Hitler all the way through to the end, and is very thorough and well researched. Now it's incredibly thick, so make sure you know what you're doing when you start it, because it's hard to finish in the time that it takes for a library to give it to you. A similar one, but completely different at the same time, is Blitzed by Norman Euler. This is about drug use by Hitler and the Third Reich. It's a lot more lighthearted than a lot of other books, but it's also about drugs, so probably not for kids. If you are interested in Russian history, another great book is The Story of Russia by Orlando Figes, beginning of Russian history all the way to the current day. This book just came out in September of 2022. It's a great book. It's pretty short, but it goes through a lot of the different history from pre-Tsarist Russia all the way to the current day. It really shows why Russia would be a really terrible place to live in basically all of human history. Also, something I really liked about the book is the audiobook is done by Stefan Rudnicki, a lot of the audiobooks for the Ender's Game series. And he has a great, really cool narrator voice, really deep and awesome. Definitely recommend any book narrated by him. Any book that I would recommend you read, I'm going to make an Amazon list of books on Amazon, so you can check those out. You can buy them there, or you can look at them and try and find them at your local library, or just kind of keep them in the back of your head for next time you want to go buy a book. Always looking for new books to read, so drop in the comments below any book at all, especially if it's history related. Subscribe for more. I'm having so much fun making all these videos. I'm never going to stop, so subscribe. Let's go on this journey together and check out these other videos.